Chapter 3, Kinetic Concepts of Human Movement. What is it? So it's dealing with biomechanics, and biomechanics is, like it says there, a study of living things from a mechanical perspective. So it's using principles of physics that are associated with motion and forces to help us make performances better. Gets used by coaches, it gets used by trainers, teachers, athletes. There's a whole heap. There's, even medical purposes to it. But it basically, it looks at performance from either a qualitative or a quantitative point of view. So, if we're talking in terms of qualitative, it might be something like, tennis serve, you might need to stand up taller or bring your racket back further. Whereas a quantitative, it looks at your performance from a numbers point of view with like measurements and times and all that sort of stuff. So it's similar to chapter 2. But it's always looking at the improvement of human performance. So what we have over here on the right-hand side of the screen, and you'll see a video on this in a second, is called, it's an optoelectronic motion analysis, or motion analysis for short. It's used to capture, in this instance, someone bowling. It looks at their bowling technique, and then it will be taken back later on and analyzed and broken down and so on and so forth. But it's also used to capture character movements in computer games and movies, and it also, like I said, gets used for medical purposes, which we'll have a look at now.
Motion analysis is a way of looking at how a human being can move through space. And 3, 2, 1. In the field of orthopedics and sports medicine, we can look at how the bones and joints and muscles all move within a person to create a sport movement. Motion analysis gives us an idea of if there's potential risks for injury, or if somebody's rehabilitating from injury, what those differences in motion are. Nice. During a motion analysis test, we typically put on a series of very small reflective markers. We put them on different bony sites all over a person's body, key areas that give us an idea about the sport of interest. Our cameras that are located around the room reflect infrared light on these reflective markers and help us to create a moving figure in space. The computers pick up all these little markers, and then using our computer software, we can create three-dimensional figures from that person moving. We look to see whether the right side moves similarly to the left side, if it should, or if it's an asymmetrical sport like throwing, what those joint mechanics are actually doing. So we can determine what the joint angles are and how fast those joints are moving in space. That gives us an idea when we compare that person's data to those of elite athletes or those who are healthy athletes. We can get an idea of whether or not that person is running the risk for injury, or if they can optimize their performance by tweaking their motion a little bit. Motion analysis can actually be used for a wide variety of purposes, not just for athletes. It can also be used for individuals who are starting up an exercise program and think that they might have a potential risk for injury. We can use it in rehabilitative processes to see the progress of how well a person is getting back to normal with their motions of their joints. So motion analysis is very useful across the age spectrum and fitness spectrum.
So there you go, some of the uses for optoelectronic motion analysis. It has a large number of applications and also benefits. So let's have a look at biomechanics. It is looking at, like we said, a number of different things relating to physics and to motion and all that sort of stuff. So a force is defined as either a push or a pull. And what happens is it causes objects to change shape, change direction, or change speed. So all forces produce or change movement. And it can cause the objects to accelerate. It can cause objects to decelerate as well. So the equation that you're going to need to remember for the purpose of the exam is force equals mass times acceleration, okay, or F equals ma. And there's different types of force that exist. We have gravity, we have weight, and we have friction. All right, so here's a couple of examples of forces. We've got the tennis racket exerting a force on the tennis ball down below, and you also have the person pushing down on the bike pedals, creating a force which then, as a result, makes the bike move forward. So, forces in action. There are, like we said, different forces. We have gravity, we have weight. Gravitational force is the force attraction between two objects. So on Earth, gravity is the result of, us falling down and hurting ourselves, because if we're overbalanced and we trip over, gravity is what's going to basically bring us down to the ground. Okay, then we've got our weight force. Let's clear up these two terms, the mass and the weight thing. Mass is the amount of matter that an object is made up of. So everything is made up of mass. You're made up of mass, or matter, sorry. And weight is your mass times gravity. So if you're looking to lose weight, the perfect way to do that isn't to diet, it's actually to move up to the moon, okay? Because your mass isn't going to change, but because the moon has a lower amount of gravity, it means that your weight is going to be less. In terms of like forces acting upon other objects, okay, if we were to throw a ball and there was no gravity, because there's no external force acting upon it, the ball is just going to keep moving at that same velocity. Whereas when we throw a ball in Earth, the effect of gravity means that the ball is going to do that sort of that parabola, or that curved, follow that curved path and eventually come back down to Earth. So what would actually happen if we were, excuse me, there's my breakfast, to throw the ball up in space? And I found a really cool video that illustrates it. So here you go. Because this is what the space station was actually created for. So you can see the impact that gravity has or doesn't have. The ball is continuing to rotate at the same speed that it was thrown at. It's also continuing on in the same direction that it was thrown at. And the only reason that it's going to stop is because it looks like it's going to hit part of the space station. So you go a total of 564,000 yards. Don't ask me what that is in meters, but that's the effect of no gravity in space. Or sorry, on a ball. So frictional forces. Friction occurs when two surfaces contact each other, come into contact with each other. They oppose motion. Okay, you can increase, you can decrease it if you want to improve performance. So in the instance of, let's say, weightlifting, people want to increase the amount of friction they have, which is why they, they put their hands in the chalk and they dust the hands, and that increases the friction that they're able to put onto the bar. Okay, but for something like speed skating or that sort of stuff, we don't want to, or even, no, let's just go speed. You don't want to have that same amount of friction. You actually want to have less friction, because then you will go faster, which is why they wear all the the lycra and all that sort of stuff. And the same with the cyclists with their helmets. Okay, the idea is to make themselves as slippery as possible and reduce that that frictional force, or the drag. Okay, so drag force is the frictional force that occurs when one of the surfaces is air or water, which is why we have people like the swimmers wearing those suits as well. And eventually they get to a point where it becomes almost unfair, which is what happened with the swimmers. Not everyone was able to afford the technology that was being produced, and so they deemed them to be an unfair advantage, and they were, taken off the market. Drag force, it should be noted, as speed increases, so does the drag force. You may remember the video that we watched about the Bugatti and breaking the speed record of 400 odd kilometers, and how much horsepower is needed for that next 100 kilometers as opposed to the first few hundred, because as the resistance from the air increases, so does the drag on the car, so it needs more. Anyway, looking at frictional forces, here's a video I produced earlier.
Alright, so here's some real life examples of frictional forces in play. I got my remote, just something I grabbed off my desk, okay? And I'm going to put it on a couple of different surfaces.
Here's the remote.
So here we go, let's have a look. My desk, nice and smooth, there's my remote again, and just a one finger push. Goes quite a way. Onto the floor, right? Same one finger push. Doesn't go very far at all, because you've got the increased friction of the carpet as opposed to the smooth surface of the desk.
So, there you go. You can see the impact of friction on objects. Moving on to inertia. So an object is going to remain at rest or in constant motion unless acted upon by an external force, which we've already talked about when we saw the ball floating through space. So inertia is an object's resistance to change its state of motion. So the greater the mass of an object, the greater the inertia that it has. And we'll come back to inertia as well later on in this presentation when we look at moment of inertia, which is to do with angular motion. Here is another video which will hopefully explain that.
So in the interests of keeping this interesting, Joel, I'm going to look at inertia for you here. All right? So, what we have here is we have a couple of bits of wood that will be burnt later on, okay? There's one here. All right, see, there he is on the ground there. And then we're going to get another bit of wood. All right, and that's that bit of wood there. So, we're going to look at, and when I can find it, so we're going to look at inertia. Never mind, I'll be back in a sec. Inertia is something's resistance to change, yeah? Okay, so a body is going to remain in its current state of motion unless acted upon by an external force. So, we've got our two pieces of wood. Can't lift that one.
Good one.
Example number one. Picking it up, yeah? Okay. Throw it around. I'm acting upon its state changing its motion. Okay, nice and easy. So that one's got a little bit of inertia. This one here, our big log, got to find a way to lift it properly. Bend your knees, it's really important, keep the back straight. This one has a lot more inertia. Its mass is greater, which means it's also really bloody heavy. Okay, I won't be tossing that one around. I hope that kept it interesting for you, Joel. Back in the comforts of inside now. So, thinking about what you just saw, okay, the little log had the least amount of inertia and therefore required the least amount of force to, lift it up and throw it around and do all that sort of stuff. But the big log, that had a lot of inertia. I don't know how much it weighed. It was a good few kilos. Scratch that, it was more than a few kilos. So it required a lot more force to lift that log.
There you go, as explained by me. I'm Rocky. I'm going to explain momentum. Momentum is a measure of the amount of motion an object has and its resistance to changing that motion. Momentum, which is P, is equal to the amount of mass of the object multiplied by its velocity. Momentum equals mass times velocity. The result of this equation is expressed in meters per second. Thanks, Rocky. So, what does all that mean? Let's have a look.
Okay, I think we'd better see some science.
Roll a snowball down a hill, and it gains mass as it picks up snow, which compacts as it rolls, making it denser. The more mass or speed the snowball has, the more momentum it'll have. If the snowball hits someone, it'll transfer some momentum to them as it loses momentum. Sorry, but it's the law of conservation of momentum.
Now, so you've got a mitt full of snow, now for momentum. Find yourself a nice slope and roll away.
But please, be careful. Believe it or not, rolling 1-ton snowballs can be very dangerous. See what I mean? More mass equals more momentum. Now, that one appears to have a lot less momentum, but it's increasing to about the same as a motorbike doing 22 miles an hour.
So basically, the greater the mass something has, and the faster it's moving, the greater momentum it has. So, if we compared, say, a tennis ball versus, I don't have anything that's heavier, here we go, compared to my work backpack, okay, the backpack is going to have a greater momentum if it was to move at the same velocity because it has a greater mass. So, looking at momentum. So, an object that's stationary, i.e. it's not moving, is going to have no momentum. But, and this is what we were talking about before, if the two objects have the same mass but different velocities, the object that has the greater velocity is going to have the greater momentum, okay? Which you can see, not exactly, but it's kind of illustrated in the next one. But let's say both the players weighed 80 kilos, okay? The person that is moving faster is going to have the greater momentum, which will mean that in this instance, so let's change this to 80, and he's 80. So if we do 80 times 6 gives us, what does it give us? 480 meters. Well, this is really hard. Meters a second. If we times 80 times 7, we get 560. I need to get myself a tablet, a touchscreen. Oh wait, I do, I should use it. So player B is going to have a greater mass in this instance, okay? Because they, a greater momentum. They both have the same mass, but because player B is moving at a faster velocity or faster speed, he's going to have the greater momentum, and they will both continue on in that direction. Okay. However, the object that has the greater mass and the same velocity, okay, so let's say that these guys are now moving at the same speed, okay, so let's just get rid of this and get rid of this. This. Alright, so we'll change this to now, what are we doing? We're traveling at the same velocity, so he's going to be traveling at 6 meters per second. So we got 90 times 6 gives us 540 meters per second, and then this guy is going to be 8 times 6, which means he's doing 480 meters per second. Okay, so in this instance, and I forgot to erase it, in this instance, player A has the greater momentum, which means they're going to continue in that direction. Okay, hope that clears up momentum for you. So we talked about, or the video that we watched briefly touched on conservation of momentum. So the example that we have here, so conservation basically means constant, not changing. All right. When a baseball is struck with a baseball bat, the momentum is transferred from the bat to the ball. Okay. After the bat comes to a complete stop, the momentum that was possessed by the bat prior to striking the ball is going to be the same as the momentum that is possessed by the ball and moving off now. So basically the bat plus the ball when it's stationary is equal to the bat, which is now stationary, plus the momentum of the ball. And there's a couple of other examples there. This one up the top here with the hockey sticks, that is straight out of your textbook. Okay, these are just a couple picked up off the web. But if you look at the before, the medicine ball has momentum of 80 kilos, 80 kilos expressed in meters per second. It's not moving, never mind. Basically, afterwards, the combined amount is going to be 80 kilos in meters per second. Here's another example.
So, like the Newton's cradle, the impact of one ball on another produces a compression wave that goes through the ball. Any efficiently elastic material from steel to a rubber ball will do this. I have a really good way to show this by adding a different ball into the mix, a water balloon. I'll also need to show some slow-mo science with the help of Darren, the man who can slow down time, and some help from a fellow science enthusiast named Trevor, a middle school student.
It's pretty cool, huh?
Very cool.
Okay, Trevor, so you saw when we did the Galilean cannon, all those balls stacked up on one top of another? Yeah. So we're gonna look at that in an interesting way, because I have a water balloon here, and we're gonna use a tennis ball, okay? So actually, you're gonna do this. So here, hold this balloon, and you wanna stack this on top. On the count of 3, I want you to drop it, and we're gonna observe what happens to the tennis ball, okay? Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Drop. There we go. Perfect. So what did you observe?
That when you dropped it, the tennis ball shot up.
Exactly.
Energy.
Because all of the momentum from this water balloon was transferred into that tennis ball and shot it right up in the air. Now, Darren has his high-speed camera, so we actually can watch that happen in slow motion.
Let's watch it.
So you can see the energy, the momentum that was transferred from the water balloon to the tennis ball.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That's like when you go in slow motion.
Just like
your lips
that.
go.
But what's cool about this is that the water balloon kind of highlights where the energy is transferred. So you see how the ball kind of floats down with it, and then it sucks in and pushes it away.
Well, when you take the balloon and you put the tennis ball on top and you drop it, the energy from the balloon transfers into the tennis ball and shoots it up. It looked like the balloon supersized the bounce. I thought the demo was very cool, especially the slow motion.
So you like science?
Very much so, yes.
I'm glad to hear that. What's your favorite area of science to study?
Probably life science.
Yeah, it's important to learn about living things.
Very much so, yeah.
Well, I appreciate your help, man. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
Don't try it at home. I watched a video of this morning. Don't try it at home with a can though. Bloke dropped a can and a ball and the can ended up smacking him in the head. It's actually really funny. You should go and look at it. So the next concept that you need to know about is summation of momentum, or it's also known as summation of force or force summation. There's a few different names. When I was teaching PE last, it was called force summation. Anyway, summation of momentum. So the objective of any sport is to hit, kick, throw, whatever, as the object as far or as fast as possible. Okay, so any movement that requires multiple joints requires this summation of momentum. So basically what happens is all the body parts need to be used in like a perfect sequence. Okay, so there's a few different parts to a successful performance, and you can see the picture up the top there. Okay, if the parts are all moving too early, then you lose a lot of that force. Okay, and if they're moving too late, then you also lose a lot of force. But if it's well timed and it's executed perfectly, then you end up with the maximum amount of force, which then means that your performance will be as good as it possibly can be. So to maximize the amount of force, you need to use as many parts as possible. Okay, and you should sequence them correctly, starting with the large parts, so your legs, your torso, your glutes, all that sort of stuff, dependent on what the actual activity is. Start with the large parts with the greatest mass or the greater mass first, followed by those smaller mass parts, but they have that greater velocity. Okay, then you need to make sure that each of those different parts are stable and balanced before transferring the momentum onto the next part of that, and we'll look at an example in the next slide. And then finally, it's all got to be timed to perfection. Okay, so transferring the momentum after the maximum velocity of that body part has been reached, not too long after and not too soon before. So here we go. We'll have a bit of a look at it in this video, which I stole off ABC PE. They did a revision thing, and I just heard my little girl wake up. Hello. Hello, Charlie. So here's the video.
I'm going to show you a couple of videos here. One, we've got the great man throwing with his dominant hand, and one non-dominant. So that's his dominant, and you can see that it was balanced. The sequencing was good. He used many body parts. He reckons he scored a goal there. I can confirm that he did not. This is him on his non-dominant hand. You can hopefully get an idea throughout this movement. Body's not as stable. The timing is nowhere near as good from his other hand. And as you can see there, as in his left-hand throw, balance and sequencing nowhere near as strong.
Before we skip on, see if you can have a go at that question. So reference to the force summation principles, which throw, dominant or non-dominant hand, would have gone further and why? So just have a go at that question in your own time. So now we're going to look at impulse. So impulse is equal to the change in momentum of an object. So to change momentum, you've got to apply a force over time. Okay, so some sporting applications, you might have softball, where you apply a large force, which is swinging the bat, which is applied over a very short period of time to little tiny softball, or sorry, big softball, that then obviously sends it out into the outfield. On the flip side, you've got golf, putting to get the ball into the hole, where you're applying a very small force, but it's applied over a longer period of time to move the golf ball into the hole. Okay. Other examples of impulse and changing the momentum of an object, you could see with a couple of pictures there from us earlier on in the year when we were catching an egg. But there's also they're still sporting applications, but the idea of reducing injury risks. So often what you find, cricketers and all those people that are catching objects, okay, they will, they'll cradle the ball and give with the ball to reduce the risk of injury and having the ball to smack them in the hands or whatever it might be. Perhaps jumping from a height. Okay, you're going to do a lot of damage if you were to jump from 2 or 3 meters and not absorb the impact with your legs and with your body. If you just stood there and jumped and then tried to land and not absorb that impact, then you are going to do a lot of damage to muscles and your body. So the calculator, or the formula to work out impulse, is force over time, or P. Impulse is P, or momentum, is force multiplied by time. Okay, so now we move on to Newton's laws. Okay, there are 3 laws that you need to know. The first law is a body will remain at rest unless acted upon by an external force.
Joel, just keeping it interesting for you, looking at Newton's first law. So Newton's first law is, not much answering, it's a body will remain at rest unless acted upon by an external force. All right, here we go. I have my coin. It's not doing anything.
Not very rich.
It's not being acted upon by any external force. It's just sitting there. It's not really doing anything interesting. But what happens if I pick it up and then, so I get this right, and I spin it? It starts moving. Obviously, gravity is acting on it, and it's just lying there again.
So, Newton's first law. Newton's second law. A force applied to an object will produce a change in motion, acceleration, in the direction of the applied force that is directionally proportional to the size of the force. Hopefully this video will explain it, and Charlie will.
Can you say Newton's second law?
I did.
Say it again.
Nope.
Why not?
Go.
Because Newton's second law, Joel, and everyone else too. We've got 2 objects.
Bye.
A force applied to an object is going to produce a change in motion, so it's going to accelerate in the direction of the applied force, you'll see in a second, that is directly proportional to the size of the force. So, what we're going to do is, we've got my emergency dad jokes cup, which is actually quite a large cup. I don't have anything that I can put it sort of in reference to, but it's a big cup. It's not full anymore, and we have my 20-cent piece. Here's the force. Alright, just a little push with the finger. Now let's see how this one goes. Doesn't go quite as well. Needs more of a force to push it off the desk. So, that's Newton's second law. Say bye, Charlie. Bye-bye.
Hopefully that explained that. Finally, Newton's third law. For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Last video, Newton's third law. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In this instance, I'm going to be using a tennis ball, and I'm just going to be tossing it against the wall and seeing what happens. So here we go. Tennis ball, wall, equal and opposite reaction. So
that didn't drop it.
Force of me throwing the ball at the wall, it hits the wall, and then the ball absorbs the energy and it's returned back to me.
The other way that you could observe this a little bit easier, and it just wasn't possible for me to record it, this is straight out of the textbook, is if you had a medicine ball and a person standing on the skateboard. Person throws a medicine ball to the person standing on the skateboard. The force that is applied to the medicine ball will then be transferred to the person standing on the skateboard that's stationary, and then you will see the person obviously on the skateboard moving back away from the person that was throwing the medicine ball. Okay, so more Newton's laws. These are the angular motion ones. The first Newton's law of angular motion says that the angular momentum of a body remains constant unless acted upon by an external torque. Now, these laws are very similar to Newton's laws of motion. Okay, whereas we were talking about linear motion before, now we're talking about angular motion. So in this instance, we'll have a look at these in a little bit, like with videos and stuff like that. We'll just go through the laws really quickly. The second law, a torque applied to an object will produce a change in angular motion in the direction of the applied torque that is directly proportional to the size of the torque and inversely proportional to the moment of inertia of the object. That's a mouthful. And then the third law, for every torque there is an equal and opposite torque. And you're probably wondering where I am. Here I am. Here we go. I'm back. So let's have a look at these and let's try and explain these a little bit better. So angular motion is a movement around either an internal or external axis. So we're going to get a few of these little terms out of the way. So you can see on the pictures there, we have an internal axis with our swimmer and their shoulder, and it's not letting me draw. Why isn't it letting me draw? There we go. Okay, so there's an internal axis there, and then we have our external axis here with the gymnast rotating around the horizontal bar. Okay, then we have angular momentum, which is calculated by the moment of inertia, which we'll go through in a sec, and the angular velocity. So it gets spoken about in a couple of different ways. So when we swing a bat, okay, we're able to manipulate and change the angular momentum. We can either hit the ball harder or we can hit it softer. But when we're in the air, we have no control over our momentum, and it stays the same. It's conserved, which is the term conservation of angular momentum, which we'll look at in a little bit. So how difficult it is to change an object's angular momentum is a product of that thing's moment of inertia. The greater the moment of inertia, so remember inertia was an object's resistance to changing, okay? So changing the object's momentum is going to be impacted by the object's moment of inertia. So the bigger the inertia or the greater the inertia, the more difficult it's going to be to actually change the momentum. And this is what we're talking about. So we have our two cricket bats. We've got a Kanga cricket bat and we've got the adult full version. Okay, so I'm sure you've all played with, you know, the yellow cricket bats at school. They're generally smaller. Okay, they're generally lighter as well. okay, which means that they're going to have a lower moment of inertia and less reluctance to rotate. So they're going to be able to be moved a lot easier, which means they're going to be easier to swing, which in terms of, you know, children, okay, the idea is that we want them to experience success, so we're going to modify the games, okay? So this is why you'll often see, you know, kids holding full-size cricket bats right up towards the top of the bat, or sorry, the bottom of the bat, because it makes it easier to swing. It changes that, and we'll look at levers in a little bit, but it changes the length of that lever. Whereas the adult cricket bat, it has a larger mass, which means it's heavier, it's bigger, like longer, so it has a larger radius, it has a greater moment of inertia, and it has more reluctance to rotate, which means it's harder to swing for young children and also for some adults, okay? So that is the moment of inertia. So then we talk about conservation of angular momentum. All right, we talked about this one earlier. So when we're airborne, we have no control over our momentum. It stays the same. It's conserved. All right, so what happens is when we're in the air, we can change our moment of inertia by either tucking up, like you see in this example up here. Right, so when we're tucked in the middle, we have our greatest amount of angular velocity, but we also have our lowest amount in terms of our moment of inertia. Whereas in the tucked position, or sorry, not the tucked position, the layout position, okay, when our body is no longer tucked anymore, we also have our lowest amount of angular velocity. So we're moving slower because, and it ties in with it, we have our highest amount of moment of inertia. I don't know whether it's going to work in here because I've got too many chairs, but I mean, you've probably all seen the whole, you know, and you've all done it before, but spinning on the chair, my chair doesn't even spin, so I'm not even going to try it. But when you spin around on the chair and you tuck your legs in, you move really, really fast. But then when you open out, it slows down and it almost stops. Okay. We'll look at it a little bit more later on, but that is the end of chapter 3. Thanks for watching. Hey, little one. That was really bad. I was going to call her a nickname, but I'm not going to give it away. What's your nickname? No, she's all shy. If you've got any questions, shoot me a message on Teams. No comments, please, Joel. I'd like to think I've done a little bit better of an effort this time around. No, comments are fine. If you've got any questions, give me a yell on Teams. Thanks for watching.